So in this video I'm gonna show you how to make custom objects. So the first thing you wanna do is open your browser and and open this sheet. This has pretty much all the information about objects that you're ever gonna need. And the first part of making a custom object is always choosing which object to edit, because custom objects aren't really custom. It's more the visuals are edited of an existing object. So you have to get a bit creative with them sometimes. And a good way is to just look at other custom tracks and see how they use objects and what's possible with them. So for example, I saw the bullet bills on Sneaky's Airship Fortress and realized, okay, that's a really smart way to use the volcano ball object. So I decided that's the object I'm gonna use. So on the sheet, you can then see all the basic information, like which ID for the KMP, render distance, collision, all that useful stuff. You can go into the settings to see what settings it's gonna need in the KMP, and also required files. So you can see Volcano Ball 1, it requires the Brasd and also a Bref and a Breft. And theoretically, we could edit all of those to make them custom. But in this example, we're probably just gonna edit the Brasd. So we're gonna add a custom model, and then later we're gonna add some animations to it as well to make it feel a little bit more alive. Okay, so the first thing you need is a model that you're gonna rig up. I've got this model of a hippo with a rocket attached to his back. So first add an armature. Go into the armature tab, viewport display, check in front so you can actually see what you're doing. You can move the bone around, rotate, scale, all that good stuff. You can go into the bone tab so you can see the name of the bone as well. We're gonna rename them later. Go on the end of the bone and E to extrude to make another bone. And you can kind of move them around so it fits the model. So this one's going to be for the head, and it's important that you go into relations and then uncheck connected so you can independently move the bone around. Next up, I'm gonna do the bones for the legs. So again, uncheck connected. And then you can just duplicate the bone for the legs because it has the same parent bone. Then just move them to the side so they're actually on the leg. And just duplicate again for the other side. So now I want to make another bone for the rocket because I want to independently move the rocket around a bit for the animation. So now we have the armature set up pretty much. We're gonna rename the bones because it's easier to work with. So I'm gonna name that one belly, head for the head, and then for the legs, I'm just gonna go with leg underscore F for front and then left, and do that with the other ones as well. And then for the rocket, if you go to armature, the bones have a tree structure. So if you later move the belly bone, all the other ones will move as well. Now it's time to actually assign the armature to the mesh. So what you do is in object mode, select both the mesh and the armature. Right click, parent, and with empty groups. So now the mesh is actually assigned to the armature. And if you go into the mesh object tab, under vertex groups, you're gonna see all these vertex groups, and They have the same name as the bones. You assign vertices to the group, and then if you move the bone around, that mesh will also move. So I'm just gonna select everything for the rocket here and assign it to the rocket bone. And now if you go into pose mode and move this bone around, you will see the rocket moves as well. You can rotate, scale, which is going to be used later for the actual animation. So now I'm just gonna go ahead and do the first leg. And also uncheck that in front because we don't need it right now. So I just select everything and then again click assign for the other vertex group. And then I'm just gonna repeat that for the other legs as well. Now you can see I actually made a mistake here because I assigned both legs to the same vertex group because apparently I can distinguish between front and back. So to fix this, you can just select everything that's not supposed to be part of the bone and then click remove on the vertex group and assign it to the actually right one. So now that's fixed. You can see if I select them. So I'm just gonna do the rest of the model now. And for the last bone, a trick you can do is just select everything and then deselect the bones that already have something attached assigned to them. And then we're gonna be left with everything that hasn't been assigned yet, and you can just assign that to the last bone. Now, two other things that are very important. The first one is that you don't want to have the same vertices applied to two different bones. The second thing is if you have different materials, that you also don't have two different materials applied to the same bone. Now in this case we only have one material, but if you have multiple, just create an extra bone for the second material. So now we pretty much have a fully rigged model. If we go back into pose mode and check in front, we can see, okay, the belly controls everything and the head. We can pretty much move everything around as we wish. And the plan is to have the rocket do a little jiggle motion in the animation later. And the legs, they look a little bit fucked up, but we can easily fix that. Just gotta assign a bit more to the legs. Go back into edit mode. You can see, okay, there's like 3 vertices that maybe should be part of the legs instead of the belly. So we can just select those on every leg. And then go to the belly vertex group and remove them. So now they're not assigned to anything, so we gotta assign them to the legs. So now we can go back into pose mode and see, yeah, okay, this is a lot better. So now to export it, pretty simple. Just go back into object mode, select everything, file, export as FBX. And very important, you go down to armature and unselect add leaf bones because it just adds some extra bones that we don't need. Then convert the whole thing to DAA. And it's pretty much ready to import into Brawlcrate. So you're gonna need the default file for whatever you're gonna edit. So in this case, it's gonna be Volcano Ball 1. We have the Volcano Ball and the shadow. We don't need to change the shadow. So here's the default Volcano Ball from Grumble Volcano. You can right click it and then hit replace and then just select the DA that we just converted. And the import settings, if it doesn't work for you, you can just copy what I have. But it should probably work with what you have already. And you can see we have our model now without any textures, of course, so we gotta import those as well. We can delete the old texture for the old model because we obviously don't need it anymore, and import the new texture. And now we can see we have our model. Obviously, it's way too bright because Brawlcrate kind of insists on having the one setting to multiply by 4 for some reason. And you can go into the bones folder and you can see all the bones that we have in our Blender file as well. So that all worked. So I'm just gonna quickly go and fix some of the settings so it actually looks acceptable. So yeah, here we go. It's a bit dark, but that could just be a Brawlcrate thing. It might also be a bit too big, too small, because I didn't really pay attention to the scaling, but we can always fix that afterwards. So now we can just save the file and put it in game and see if it works. And as you can see, it works. It looks maybe a bit small. I would probably scale it up a bit. But we can also do that in the next step when doing animations. Because yeah, we're gonna apply an animation to this. Yeah, so now we're gonna do animations. And for this, it's important that you downgrade your Blender to version 2.81 because the plugin we're gonna be using doesn't work on any other version. Also keep in mind that model animations don't work for every object. So check the sheet I showed earlier if the object supports animations. So open up the Brasd again and then go to the model and then export it as DIA. And I've made a separate folder for it. I can recommend that as well because we're gonna do another Blender project just to make it a bit more organized. And of course the texture as well. So I've put the template in the description, which already has all the tabs open and stuff, so we don't need to change a bunch of settings every time. So you're gonna need the animation plugin, which is gonna be in the description as well, and install it on this version of Blender. And then if everything is installed correctly, you can go to File, Import, and this is important, you gotta use the Brawlbox model.dia import, and then open the DIA that you just exported from Brawlcrate. So now we have our model. It doesn't have any textures, but we can quickly fix that. And there we go. Go back into the animation tab. And now we can pretty much just do our animation. And you can see the bones look kind of messed up because they are messed up, but you just gotta deal with it. It's like a thing with the importer. Sometimes it works better, sometimes worse, but the animation looks correct in the end, so yeah. But now we can pretty much start animating. We just gotta add a new action in the top left. The name doesn't really matter because you can always rename the file in the end, but you can have the correct name here already, then you don't have to rename anything. So the name would be the same name as the animation in the Brasd. So in this case, it's just Volcano Ball 1. So how it works, you have your timeline at the bottom, and you can change how many frames there are gonna be. And every time you move a bone, it's gonna make a keyframe in the timeline at the bottom. So I'm just gonna scale the whole thing by 1.2 because it looked a bit small in game. And now I'm gonna go to the rocket bone and create a bit of randomness every 30 frames. I'm gonna extend the whole thing to 200 frames. It is always important to have the last frame be the same one as the beginning one if your animation is supposed to loop, which this one is. So you can just copy that over. If you hit play, you can see, okay, the rocket jiggles around a bit, which is pretty much what I wanted. And now I'm gonna go to the head and create a bit of motion there as well. The animation process can take a bit of time, but I'm just gonna do the rest, and after everything's done, we can look at the animation. So now the animation is done. I'm pretty happy with how it turned out. And now we're gonna export the thing and import it into our Brasd. So go to File, Export, Ballbox Animation, just export it. It's as easy as that. And now we have the animation file here. And if we go back into our Brasd, we can just import model animation and then just choose the file we just exported from Blender. And now the only thing you have to change is the version to 5. And if your animation is supposed to loop, just set loop to true. And now we can test it in game. So in game you can see everything is working fine. It has the correct animation. The scale is also pretty good, I would say. Now I have no idea how you're supposed to use that object to fit thematically, but if you do want to use it for whatever reason, you can find it in the description. So now you know the basics of making custom objects, and you could, with that knowledge, make one yourself. So now I wanted to make a second custom object, just to show you that each object can be a bit different. And this one will be based off the Mari_A object. And this object is special because it has two animations and they are based on distance. So if you're farther away, it will play one animation, and if you get closer, it will play another animation. You can see this object being used on a lot of Square Turnbull tracks. He made a custom bird object, and if you get close to it, it flies away. So we're gonna be making something similar to that. So again, on the sheet, you can see the ID, and if you go into settings, you can set the distance at which the second animation gets played, which is gonna be very important for the object we're gonna make. And in required files, you can see this object has only a Brasd and nothing else. So the idea is pretty simple. I made this pretty basic room right here. And you can see the floor has tiles. Now the idea is that one of these tiles will actually be an object, and when the player moves close to it, it will rise up to reveal a pit. So from a distance, it will look like a pretty normal floor, and when you get closer, the pit reveals itself. So now here the placement of the object is pretty important. That's why I have it as a separate Blender object in the course model. So I can just copy the coordinates later and put it into the KMP. So the first step is gonna be to copy this object and put it into a separate Blender file, which is then gonna be the custom object. So I've just gone ahead and copied it into another Blender file, and you might be wondering why it suddenly got a face, but I have a good reason. I've got a good idea, because just the tile floating in the air, it's maybe gonna look a bit weird, but if you give it a face, it's like completely legit. It makes sense. You know, the angry tile doesn't want you driving over him, and I thought it would be pretty fun to give him a face. Now the face is gonna be in a lower position, because if you put it exactly on the tile, the eyes and the eyebrows will clip through the floor. So we have to put it a bit lower, and then when the animation's placed, we're gonna move it up to fit on the floor tile. So again, the process is pretty similar to the last object, so I'm gonna go through it a bit quicker this time. So again, create an armature, set it as in front so you can see. Just gonna center it to the middle of the object. And now this object is only gonna need two bones, one for the slab, one for the face. The placement of the bones isn't as important here, it's just gotta be roughly in the same place and it should be fine. Now we're just gonna rename the bones. It's just two bones, but it doesn't hurt to rename them. So we're gonna just call them slab and face. And now select both, Control P, and with empty groups, just assign the slab to the slab, and everything else can be to the face. And now if you go into pose mode, you can see, okay, yes, everything works. Now this time, because we have two materials, we got a separate by material, so select everything and separate by material. And then again, go into object mode, select everything, export FBX. Always uncheck leaf bones, and then just quickly convert it. So now we open the original Mari_A object. And you can see how this looks originally on Peach Beach. And we can open the animations here, and you can see the wait animation is the default one, and when you get closer, the clapping animation starts to play. So we can just replace the model for our floor tile and import the textures. And then we can delete the old textures as well, because we don't need them. The lighting is all messed up again, so I'm just gonna quickly fix that again. And then once we have everything ready, we can export the model again for our animation. So I've got another folder again, animate, where I'm gonna save it, and also move the textures there. And then you have to downgrade your Blender again to 2.81. You're always gonna need to downgrade for the animation part. So just open the template, and then we can import our model with the Brawlbox import option. The bones are really small again, but whatever. So now for animations, again, we can just create a new action and call it the same as the animations in the Brasd. So this time we have two animations. One is called wait and one is called clapping. So first I'm gonna create a wait animation. The waiting animation isn't actually gonna be anything, just gonna stand still and do nothing, but we have to create the animation for it anyway. So just two keyframes, one at the start, one at the end with the exact same placement. So now we can click here to create a new action and then we can call it clapping. I've made a small mistake here. It actually copied the keyframes from the last animation. So ideally you would create the actions first, but that's okay. We can just delete the keyframes for the bones. So now we can see if we switch between them that they have different keyframes. So now we can do the animation for the clapping part, which is just going to be a non-looping animation of it going up. And the face is also going to go up a bit more, so it actually fits on the slab. It's a simple animation, so I won't go deep into the animation process. Okay, so now the animation is done and we can export it. So again, file export, Rollbox animation, we have clapping, and then if we change to wait and go export again, it's gonna export the wait animation. So now we have our two files here, and we can go back into the Brasd and just replace the animation files. So for wait, set version to 5. So the wait animation is gonna loop, and the clapping animation again set version to 5, and loop will be false this time because if we would set it to true, it would go up and then teleport to the bottom again and go up again. And if it's false, it will go up once and then stay there, and then when we get out of range, it will default to the wait animation again. So then we can save the file, put it in game, and see if it works. One thing I should say is that I got the orientation of the model wrong. So I had to go back and rotate it by 90 degrees and then import it again to Brawlcrate. Otherwise the slab wouldn't actually look at you in game. So in game we can see if we drive closer to it, the slab pops out and it also turns with us. And then if we leave the range again, it goes back down. I think this is a pretty neat object. I'm happy with how it turned out. I might do something with it in the future, but if you want to use it as well, you can find it in the description. You could also change the texture on it in the Brasd, but I think for the effect to work, it needs to be something that's tileable with the rest of the environment. Now as a little bonus, I wanted to make a little section about Brasd files. Brasd files can be used to give objects custom sounds. Now only some objects use the files, so you gotta have to check in the required files if they even use them. But if they use them, it is a great way to give an object a bit more character. So as an example, I'm gonna use one of my latest tracks. And I've made this custom object based on the Cooper figure object, and it is pretty cool already, but with the use of Brasd, we can make it even better. So you're gonna be able to find the Brasd file in the Brasd folder inside the SCS. And this object uses two Brasd files for the two different animations it has. So in the case of the gong, the wait animation does nothing, and the vomit animation is when the gong gets hit. So if we want to give the gong a sound effect, we're gonna have to edit the vomit Brasd. Now the tool for editing these files is pretty new and it's gonna be in the description. So if you open up the original file, you're gonna see a couple of things. Now at the top, the box that says frames, that's how many frames the animation has. Ideally, you would change that to the amount of frames your custom animation has. And then we have the start frame, at which frame the sound starts to play. The end frame, so -1 just means that it will always play the full sound. Trigger just means that it gets activated by the animation, so we don't want to change that. Now we have the pitch and volume, which is pretty self-explanatory. Volume 127 is the maximum. And then the most important part is the name, which specifies which sound gets played at the animation. Now currently it is still the default, and now finding the name of the sound you want to use can be a bit difficult, but luckily there is a video on YouTube which has all the sounds from the game and the name we need to put into the Brasd file. So you can just go into the video and just look through if there is a sound that you like. Now you should keep in mind that sounds which only play on a specific track, you're gonna need to have the track be on that slot for it to work. And you can sometimes tell from the name which track the sound is from. But if you've played the game, you're gonna recognize a lot of the sounds anyway. So for example, these sounds are all from Toad's Factory, and you can kind of see the name behind the CN. There's an abbreviation for factory. And yeah, I suggest just looking through these and finding something that you like, that you think could fit your object. So I'm just gonna do that really quick. So now I found a sound that I think would fit pretty well. It is the sound that cannons make on tracks, and we can see the name right here when the sound gets played. So we can just pause that and copy it over into the Brasd file. So now to actually changing the Brasd file. First off, I'm gonna change the start frame to 20, which is about when in the animation the hammer hits the gong. Now, and I will leave at -1, type as well. Pitch volume is also all gonna stay the same. And now the name, I'm just gonna paste in the name from the video. Now you can also put more entries into the file. So you could have one sound play at frame 37 and maybe another sound should start playing at frame 50. And that way you can kind of overlay two different sounds. And that is pretty much it. You can save the file and test it in game. And in game you can see it now makes a wonderful sound that fits relatively well, I would say. And yeah, I think Brasd files are a really good way to give an object more character. So I can highly recommend using those, but it is not mandatory. And also only some objects support them anyway, so yeah. So one thing I was wondering, because I'm not entirely sure myself, so we're just gonna try that out, is what happens if you copy the same entry a lot of times and have them all start on the same frame. Theoretically, I would think that the sound would be a lot louder, so yeah, we're just gonna copy that a bit and try out what happens in game. Okay, now let's see what happens.